going to appeal again to people's vanity here. How many of you, let's just poll the audience here. How many of you have ever been to the dermatologist and acne was part of the reason why you were there? Raise your hand if you have. Just type in acne. And you were told that acne and diet were not related. So if you were told that, just type in acne / diet so that I know how many of you out there have had this problem. So we hear this all the time from dermatologists that there's no correlation between diet and acne. Yet, one of the primary treatments for acne is what? Is synthetic vitamin A. This is one of the primary treatments that dermatologists use as a tool against acne. So if diet has nothing to do with it, why are they using a vitamin in order to help with acne? If we can use a synthetic analog of vitamin A, doesn't it make sense that vitamin A deficiency potentially could cause acne or contribute to it? And we know that vitamin A is necessary for the epithelial regeneration and repair of the skin. So it makes sense that there's a correlation there. But there's also research there. It's not just a correlation. There's several research studies that are now showing that sugar consumption changes hormonal interplay. So like if you're a guy, for example, there's a great study done on men eating high levels of sugar where they found that they changed these men's diet, and what happened is their estrogen levels fell by about 25% when they took them to a lower sugar diet. So these guys that were eating lots of sugar, their estrogen levels were 25% higher, and when they took the sugar out of the diet, the estrogen levels dropped. So we know sugar impacts hormones, but in terms of acne, we know, and females especially, can actually accelerate androgen production and sebum production in the skin, which can lead to or contribute to acne formation. So we know sugar plays a role in acne. Don't ever let a dermatologist tell you otherwise. It definitely plays a role in the formation of acne, particularly inflammatory acne, because again, sugar creates an inflammatory process. Okay, number 12, behavioral problems. Some of my favorite research is in schools. There was a study done, I think it was in New York public school system, where they took the sugar out of the school cafeteria. Now, if you go to any major school cafeteria today, you know, most of the food that's being provided is pumped full of sugar and preservatives. It's junk food. And we're pawning that off on children. And then when they don't do well in school or they have disciplinary problems, we don't blame what we're feeding them, but we blame the kid. And that's a travesty, in my opinion. But anyways, research studies have shown that when you take the sugar and the preservatives and the garbage out of the food, that the grades actually increase. A study that was done in New York public schools found like a 17 or 18% increase in academic performance after removing sugar from the diet of the school. In essence, they couldn't go to school and get their sugar fix, right? I mean, some kids, their parents feed them well at home, but then send them with lunch money thinking their school's going to give them a proper meal. And what the school gives them is they give them, you know, Gatorade and Coca-Cola and all this other garbage, you know, because the food industry, unfortunately, has weaseled its way into the greedy pockets of school bureaucrats. So they're now giving schools money to put their garbage and brand your children and forever make them basically slaves of they're creating a paradigm of normalcy around eating crap. I mean, that's what it boils down to. I can put it just that plainly. And it's creating behavioral problems in our kids. And if we look at what happens to a lot, especially our young men, is they're being called diseased, right? They're actually being labeled with terms like attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and they're being medicated as a result. So they're being medicated because the schools have made deals to earn more money, right? To feed your kids garbage that changes and alters their brainwaves and changes and alters the way that they think. And then when they feed your kids bad and they give your kids a disease as a result of poorly feeding them, then they want to have you pump them full of medications, right? And so now we have this whole generation coming out of school today. Many of them have been on Adderall or Ritalin, drugs that are basically legalized cocaine that are, you know, written by the prescription pad as your kids get these diagnoses. I feel a little strongly about this if you can't tell. And then, you know, Now they have addiction problems with stimulants because Ritalin, like I said, it's a legalized form of cocaine, basically. I mean, it's not technically cocaine, but it hits the same receptors in the brain and creates the same types of response. So now these kids have been forced to take a drug to behave in school, for the last 15 years or 20 years. And then they get out in the real world and they don't want to do stimulants anymore. And they have a hell of a time coming back from that and functioning. So you got to keep in mind that sugar creates behavioral problems, and one of the best things that you can do for your kids is take the sugar out of their diet. And if they're going off to school, and I don't personally trust the schools to feed my kids. So when my kids were younger and coming up through, I never sent them to eat school lunches. I always sent them with lunch, sent them with real food, so that I knew they were being properly taken care of. My point is, don't trust your schools to feed your kids, because your schools have legalized using ketchup as a vegetable. Like, that's what the schools do. I mean, ketchup is legally considered a vegetable according to the bureaucrats in the school system. They use that so that they can show that your kids are getting a certain amount of fruits and vegetables a day, ketchup included, which, again, that's preposterous. It's a travesty. So behavioral problems, big time issues there. Now, number 13 on the list is candidiasis. If you've ever heard me talk about yeast before, or yeast overgrowth, that's what candidiasis is. It's a yeast overgrowth. There's a species of yeast that are, it inhabits most people. It's Candida albicans. You probably heard of it before. But candidiasis is when you eat too much sugar, you overfeed the Candida albicans that most people are going to have naturally. But when you overeat sugar, you basically provide a fuel substrate for Candida to grow in excess. And so it creates a scenario where Candida actually becomes problematic. It grows out of control. Remember, Candida does a few different things. Number one, it takes the vitamins, and it lives in your GI tract, and it steals the vitamins from the food that you eat to feed itself. So it actually works in a sense like a parasite. So it robs the vitamins and minerals from you. Now, this kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier, when we were saying that vitamin and mineral deficiencies were caused as a result of sugar consumption. This is another mechanism by which that can actually happen. So sugar feeds Candida. Candida overgrowth robs nutrients from you. But Candida overgrowth also, the more you feed it, remember what Candida does. It ferments sugars. So when you eat that, it produces alcohol. So there's actually a condition called auto-brewery syndrome, where you eat so much sugar, you have such a severe candidiasis that you're basically making wine every day. And so it's like creating your own wine factory within your gut. Now remember, a byproduct of alcohol is also acetaldehyde, which damages the brain, slows down your cognitive function, damages the liver. So you can see a lot of the overlap between what we're talking about tonight in terms of eating sugar. And so one of the biggest factors involved in that, in my opinion, is creating a scenario of massive candidiasis. Okay, number 14 on the list, 14 and final, but not the final. We could go on for a lot longer, but I decided to stop at 14, is fertility issues. Now, unexplainable fertility. I mean, we have epidemic rates of infertility occurring both in men and in women. And so some of the things that we know sugar can do. For females, sugar can contribute to a condition known as PCOS. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And that has to do, PCOS is basically, it's diabetes of the ovaries. And so we already talked about number 8 here, diabetes being as a consequence of sugar production. So sugar production that manifests, sugar feeding that manifests as a PCOS can contribute to a major fertility or infertility issue. So you got to keep that in mind, that for women, this is one of the mechanisms. But additionally, even for men, I said earlier that sugar consumption versus lowered sugar consumption altered estrogen by 25%. Now think about that, men. What does that do to your testosterone? What does that do to your overall hormone profile? So additionally, we know that sugar, there have been some research that shows that sugar impacts sperm motility in men. So again, it's not just women that it affects, it's men and women that it affects. So if you are struggling to have a child, if you've been told that you're infertile, if the doctor wants to inject you with a bunch of hormones to try to force fertility, and you haven't quit sugar yet, don't go the route of hormone treatments in vivo or artificial insemination or any of those other processes unless you've done your own homework and done your own diligence. Because if you can't get pregnant, it's because you're not healthy most of the time, unless you have like a physical manifestation where your ovary is got a, when I say a physical manifestation, I mean, there's some women that only have one ovary. There's some that have short or small fallopian tubes. There are some that have a physical problem with the anatomical structure, and so it's harder for them to get pregnant. But if you're not capable of getting pregnant and you're eating sugar and you're eating it as if it's normal and okay and just fine, that's one of the first things that you should do if you've got that diagnosis of infertility, especially of unknown origin. Okay, so those are the 14 that I want to talk about. And again, I want to emphasize that this is added sugars. Now, we talk about food, and you've heard me talk a lot about food. I want to just put up on the screen the definition of food for you and just let you read that for a minute and just chew on that. So food is supposed to be something that we consume, right, that provides the nutrients that we need. And in essence, those nutrients are designed to help us produce energy, stimulate growth, and maintain our life, right? And so sugar doesn't fall within that definition at all. And again, added sugar. We're talking about added sugars. We're not talking about natural sugars, but added sugars do not fall within that definition because these are empty calories. These are things that if we only ate them, it would actually end up killing us. And for many, it does end up killing you. It might take several decades, but it does end up killing you. So keep that in mind, that food and sugar in our society today, we have this society where people believe that, sugar is part of our food and that it's not a big deal. And this is apparent and obvious in the way that people choose to eat, and the way that people will drink soda every day, and the way that people will just consume high sugar foods, high sugar cereals for kids, sugary drinks. One other thing I'll mention is fruit juices. There was a study recently that compared fruit juices to sugar and found that fruit juices were just as bad as sugar. So again, when we're talking about food, a lot of your highly heated fruit sugars that are ultra pasteurized, remember the juices themselves, the nutritional value is virtually non-existent. So what you're basically left with is a high level of sugar calories with very little nutritional value. So again, that doesn't fit the definition of food. So lesson number one is be real to yourself, be honest to yourself. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. If they all, as your mom and dad probably used to say, if everyone else was jumping off a cliff, would you follow them? Well, that's kind of the way our society works right now. Everybody's eating sugar, so that means that everybody can eat sugar and that it's perfectly okay. Yet heart disease and cancer and diabetes kill more of us virtually than any other condition, and sugar is linked to all three of those diseases. So I feel pretty strongly about not eating sugar the same way I feel about not eating gluten. Like if you could just take two groups of things and have the best impact on your health overall, would be eliminate sugar from your diet today, and it would be also to eliminate gluten if you are a gluten sensitive individual. Now, some people are probably going to ask, what about natural sugars? So I'm going to answer that question really quickly, because are there natural sugars that can be consumed that are not going to be considered part of this added sugar? Again, dextrose, fructose, maltodextrin, the whole battery or barrage of different sugar names that we have. But what can be used? What are some natural sugars that can be used? Honey and maple are probably two of the best. Now, a caveat on both of these, that doesn't mean eat all the honey you want and slather all your food in maple or maple syrup. It just means if you're going to use something natural to sweeten, if you're going to have something sweet, use something natural that has real food value and real nutritional value to it, and is not just an empty calorie. But it still doesn't mean that these things should be primary staple foods in your diet, where you're just changing out your sugar for honey or changing out your sugar for maple. Like, that's not something that you should do either. But when you're producing in the kitchen, when you're making food that you want to create that has a sweet flavor for your family, it's holiday season, right? Then you should feel comfortable and confident that you could use these things and you wouldn't be providing a source of empty calories that would basically provide these 14 detriments to your family. Hey, and if you missed the earlier part of this series, click right here so you can go back and get caught up. The information there might be critical to helping you on your path to better health. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe for updates below. Have a great day.